Hello and welcome to another episode of The Coder Career with me, Cameron Blackwood. Today's guest is James Heggs. James is currently CTO and co-founder of Tech Returners, which is an organisation that gets people back into the technology industry after taking career breaks. In today's episode, myself and James discuss how we'd learn if we could do it all again. We also talk about the evolution of DevOps and, of course, what the government can do to help people both break into the industry or return to it. Hope you enjoy the show. Hi James, how you doing? Thanks so much for joining me.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for asking me to come along.
It's a pleasure to have you on. So, for listeners who aren't aware of you, or maybe haven't come across you, particularly on somewhere like LinkedIn, do you want to tell them a little bit about who you are, who you work for right now, and what you do?
Yeah, well, again, thank you for asking me to come along. Yeah, I'm James. I'm co-founder and CTO of an organisation called Tech Returners, and what we do as an organisation is enable individuals that have had a career break from an engineering career to return to those technical careers. Amongst other things, we do around upskill as well. So existing engineers, if they wish to upskill in new technologies, we do that as well.
Okay, brilliant. So it's a way of addressing the skills gap by people who actually already have those skills. It's just they're not fully integrated back into the workplace yet. Is that usually the case where maybe someone takes some time away to have a family or something like that and then decides to get back into the workforce? Is that often the case of someone who goes through tech returners?
Yeah, exactly that. Yeah, you summarised it spot on. Yeah, so it's for individuals that have had some form of a career break. That can be, like you said, commonly it's family, bringing up a family, and then are looking to come back to their engineering careers. So they might have had, 15, 20 years career with different organisations, and then have got to a stage where they would like to return to that career. They might have been, a Java developer in previous roles, and then they're wishing to return to those engineering careers through the program. And our program upskills those individuals with the latest approaches. Brings that kind of Java knowledge, which the fundamentals hasn't gone away. It's just the latest frameworks, as it might be. Refreshes that skills, and then they go into organisations post that program.
Yeah, that's a really interesting approach because I remember when I was learning to code, obviously I came from just straight up career changing and had never done anything related before. But a lot of people that I found myself learning with, either in person or online, people that I've made friends with via Twitter and that kind of thing, a lot of them had done a lot of coding work before and had taken time away, be that either to literally not work for a while. Or they maybe went and took on a non-hands-on role in
Yeah.
an organization but still in the tech industry. So, and exactly like your example there about how maybe they were using a more legacy form to Java, a lot of the time they were learning stuff like React and that kind of thing to take on a more modern stack. Saying that, Java is obviously still very prevalent, just the more modern version. So that's yeah, that's really interesting to hear. And for yourself, how did you break into the industry initially?
Yeah, so I mean, jumping back, that example there around the Java, like say if we took JavaScript for example, that's a
Mm,
great example because we'll get engineers that when they were doing JavaScript, there wasn't the ES versions, so
mm.
they've got the core principles, but there certainly wasn't the ES enhancement. So we refresh on that, and like you mentioned, the rise of JavaScript frameworks now, like React, for them it might have been jQuery as a basis, or prototype JS and things like that back when they were doing engineering. So it's refreshing on those kind of approaches, which is, the world is quite different now in terms of engineering, but those skills haven't gone away. Those
Yeah.
engineer, like the people you mentioned there, those skills haven't changed. The fundamentals of the languages still haven't changed, but the frameworks have done quite a bit. So yeah, in terms of my own experience. So I, if it take us right back, so I originally did AS levels and decided I didn't enjoy them. This is back in kind of 2002, and kind of flunked out really. Didn't enjoy them, and then decided I want to go into software engineering. So I did a BTEC I don't know if they still do BTECs, but it was a BTEC. I think they're called something else now. T levels maybe
Yeah,
now.
T level, because it was BTECs when I left school, but I had a realization. Oh, I left school a decade ago, like the other day. So actually, it was a fair while ago. But yeah, it was BTECs. I think they've changed it to T levels. Rings a bell. That must be what it is.
Yeah, yeah, I think it is. So yeah, I did a BTEC in computing at the time, and that was an enablement course for me to then go on to university. And actually, if I go even further back than that, I think the reason I got into it, I remember having a conversation with my dad, and my dad passed away when I was 16. But prior to him passing away, I remember him saying to me, "You want to get into computers, son? It's all going to be computers." And he told this story, and he's passed this off like this was true back at the time. But he told this story that somebody said to him, "Get into plastics." You know, when he was young, everything's going to be made of plastic, which obviously has come full circle now, and people are stopping
Mm,
making things of plastics. But he said, I didn't listen to them. And it's actually that line that he passed off as somebody giving him this worldly advice was actually from a movie called The Graduate. I think I posted it on LinkedIn once. Somebody was like, "That's a line from The Graduate." I was like, "Oh my goodness, my dad's passed this line," but he used that line to persuade me to go into computers, which obviously settled in. I did the kind of a BSc in software engineering, finished in 2007. Went into a software engineering role as a Java developer, at like what you would call an agency nowadays. We called it a bespoke software house at the time. Um, and then moved on to another organization, and through that organization, I joined as their first and only employee, and we scaled up to around 120 people at the point that I departed, and I was the head of development for that organisation, responsible for people in lots of different disciplines, different languages, on a SaaS-based startup. And then that brings us a bit further on. I moved into DevOps consultancy, working on government projects that were part of the GDS scheme, which was brilliant because I'd gone from kind of a SaaS-based startup where we can turn fast. We weren't, we'd grown to 120 people, so we weren't kind of turning at the speed of a speedboat, but we were still a bit faster than, say, a government organisation. And then
yeah, I
moving
can
into the
imagine.
government organisation, and it was a slightly different experience, which was, great to see different sides. And then I went um, back to that same organisation for a bit longer, where I previously was that startup for another couple of years, and then set up Tech Returners with Becky.
Brilliant. That must have been an amazing experience to go from being the first technical hire to working for for a tech focused organization that's employing over 100 people. You must have learned an awful lot very quickly and on your feet, I can imagine.
Yeah, yeah, we all did actually. I mean, it was yeah. You had to. I mean, even the laughing in your voice, you had to learn on the job. And there's things back now that I look back that um, rose tinted spectacles. Kind of that. Well, we'll just work out how to do it, and
Mm,
not to have that baggage of, should we say, of experience or of bias to think there's a better way we can do this. At the time, cloud wasn't really too much adopted. We were all on-prem kit, on-premise kit, and things like that. So at the time, like, we crafted it all ourselves. We had this big, massive relational database, and if I look back now, if somebody had set the same problem to me today, I'd probably sit there and go, "No, that's going to be tough to create." But because we had the kind of early stage, let's just set out about doing this, and you don't know what you don't know, it's quite freeing in a
mm.
sense. Yeah.
It's a really interesting point. I've been thinking about this quite a lot recently about how I don't know if you're a football fan, but I know in football a lot of the time they talk about how academies can over drill players. So for non-sports fans, that would be that a young player is told what to do over and over again to the point where it's they almost don't think for themselves. And I guess if you're put in a position where suddenly you do have to think for yourself and you have to think outside the box and think about a novel way to fix a problem, then it can be really, if you've never had to deal with it before and you don't have, like you said, the weight of expectation where you're sitting down, I don't know how to do this, I'm going to have to research it and I'm going to have to come up with a solution. It's liberating and you may be able to get more done. Like you said, it's an interesting idea.
Yeah, that just, and that's why I think having diverse teams in terms of skill sets, experience pays off, because you'll have those people that do, because they're not loaded with the bias of experience. And I don't just mean 10 years C# experience like that.
Mm.
I just mean domain knowledge experience. They'll come in and say, "Oh, why do you do it like that?" And they ask those questions, don't they? And you go, "Yeah, why do we do it like that? There is a better way." And they're not loaded with, like you said, that
Yeah.
absolutely drilled experience. Yeah.
Mentoring is very much a two-way process. I like to think in that, where the junior, if you're doing it right, the juniors are often teaching the seniors just as much as the senior is teaching the junior. And if you're in that kind of situation in an organization where it's a two-way mentorship, then you're doing something right, I think, because the seniors can question, hold on, why do we do it this way? And then they can also learn the most up-to-date stuff that the juniors have been learning because it's fresh to them. Like, for example, when I broke into the industry, hooks are brand new, but in React, and I just learned it because I was like, oh, I really hate these class-based components. What's the
Yeah.
point? I love these hooks. So I just learned hooks, and I didn't realize that was just really handy domain knowledge to have, just because I learned it because it was standard. So I think people that are listening now that are juniors and panicking because people have more experience, like, remember what you're learning now is the most absolute up-to-date stuff, which is actually really valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and hooks is a great example. I was the same. And but you almost, when you've learned hooks, you almost, for the people that, like you said, that have done class components and have had to call like set state and things like that. You almost want them to have felt a little bit of the pain of the past to know why hooks exist, but to almost go, just know that we've always closed that door and you never need to touch it again. But yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And we talked about DevOps a little bit, about how you went and did some consulting in that. And I think it's a question I get a lot, and I can't always address it, to be honest, because I've never really done much DevOps stuff myself. But I think a lot of people, when they're researching the industry, they say, hold on a minute, this seems quite a well paid particular sector within the industry, and the work looks interesting, and the demand is booming. How can I get into this? So, what would you advise to someone who is they're learning to code right now, they're getting ready to break into the industry, and they see themselves going down the DevOps path? Firstly, what made you choose that path? And secondly, how would you advise someone goes about it in 2022?
Yeah, so um so I'll do the first part, why it interests me. So I found out about it really through feeling a bit of pain. So when we were deploying our software, it was being done at kind of 2 a.m., 3 a.m. We weren't doing it kind of X times a day, 10 times a day. It was, we weren't kind of every year, but we were like once every 3 weeks, let's say, at the end of a sprint. And it was very manual. It was, we had CI processes, but there wasn't too much automation and things like that. And we're doing it at 2 a.m. because that's when it was about, or 4 a.m. when it was quiet in the UK, and then also fairly quiet east coast of America because we had American customers as well. And also, I was a single point of failure. So a really great book for people to have a read of if they're interested in DevOps is a book called The Phoenix Project. It's a bit of a novel. It's not even a textbook around DevOps. I'm sure
Do
you've
you know
read
what
it.
I love about that? This is the second week in a row the Phoenix Project's been mentioned. So if that's not an endorsement,
Yeah, and there's a character in it called Brent who basically is this conduit. Everything goes through Brent. If Brent's not there, everything stops. And we've had these in any. I'm sure you see them in any organisation. I'm sure you have as well. And that was me. Like I was deploying and things like that. And I thought there's got to be a different way for doing this. And then I come across this thing called DevOps, and kind of this way of operating of how organizations can transition. So that's how I entered it. And then that leads you down, because we're techie, aren't we? So that leads you down learning the tools and learning the automation with, say, it was Jenkins at the time that we used, and how we can deploy. I think I read a white paper by Facebook about deploying 100
mm,
times a day and thinking we need to be Facebook, and those kind of routes that we go. Um, and that's how I approached it. Now, in terms of how to get into that sector and why it's interesting, I think it can be quite daunting for people. The ops world. I think we can take our minds back to the sysadmins of the world, and they were laden with knowledge, around operating systems, security, networking, all the kind of core around a lot of, especially for web application world that we work in. And it'd be quite daunting that you're the person that is on call at 2 a.m. If it breaks, you do a release, you might break it for 300 people, 3,000 people, 300,000 people, 3 million. That we can start to worry about the aspects of it. But actually, there is that. But that's the same if we're a software developer, if we're a tester. We might miss a test that is a really crucial test, or we might make a bug. And any software that we write, we probably should whisper it, but it will always have bugs. Right? Every software we
Absolutely.
write doesn't. Yeah. So so that's always a case of the job, whatever role we do in terms of a technical role. But with DevOps, you kind of have this two factors really. You have this creativity of engineering practices. Now that things like version control, testing, they've all merged into the operations work that we do. Coding, we write infrastructure as code.
Mm.
So you have that kind of creativity, and then a really good platform engineer, site reliability engineer, whatever job title we want to go to around cloud and DevOps, will be really collaborative. Either that be internal customers, other teams, or collaborative in if a customer's having an issue with the production kit or things like that. So actually, if you're really collaborative and you like working with other humans and interacting with them, and then also got that creativity side, and you want to explore that in a different route, in this case, cloud and infrastructure and provisioning and all those kind of things. Actually, I think it is a great route for people to go down. Absolutely.
Yeah. It's a fantastic one, and it seems very meritocratic from the outside. At least from what I've seen in organizations, is the good DevOps people often rapidly rise up the ranks, and it's a good way to see your hard work rewarded because it is so obvious what you're doing. And for people who are maybe at the point where they're just writing code by themselves at the moment because they're trying to get their first job and maybe they haven't got into an organization yet, what actually is CI/CD? If you were to explain it to someone who'd never really come across it before.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so it stands for continuous integration, continuous deployment, or continuous delivery. There might be, for some people, might see it as CI, CD, CD. There's a couple
Mm.
of phases. But if we take continuous integration first, I always think of it, and I think that's probably key why you phrase the questions. If you're just writing code on your own, that CI phase is where you're taking that code that somebody's written, let's say as an individual, to make the scenario easier, and bring it into place with code that other people might have written as well. So imagine you're part of a team, or multiple teams, and you've got one developer working on one piece of the code base and another developer working on another piece of the code base. CI will be bringing those two pieces of code together, maybe running tests against it, maybe making sure that it works together, in various mechanisms, and running tests against it, making sure it merges, bringing that code together essentially is a way of doing it. There is lots of different tools that you'll come across. You'll see different, tools, to name a few, like Jenkins, Circle CI, GitHub Actions, that can do this. That bringing it together phase that I talked about, we often get machines to do that, and they're some of the tools that you might come across.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because it's definitely. I mean, I can speak for myself, having gotten into an organization, having just basically isolated learning to code for like a year in the evenings. Like, I never would have thought it was a problem because you just don't think about it, and then you actually get into an organization. And I think my first job, there were like 40 developers. I was like, oh right, okay, I see why this is an issue now. So I would definitely say to people as well, don't be like intimidated by it because I was for ages, even after I'd broken into the job. And actually, if I'm being totally transparent, really only this year I've actually started looking into those scary YAML files in the repo
It's
and
always
reading
YAML.
about what's going on. Yeah. And actually, it's not as scary as I originally thought. So I definitely encourage people to have an explore about what's kind of going on. And like, we've talked already a bit about mentorship. Just speaking to senior DevOps people is such a good idea for people if they want to learn more.
Yeah, and you've probably already done an aspect of it. So that CI phase, if we shift onto the CD in a minute, if
Mm,
people have used like GitHub Actions or GitHub Flows, I think they're called, to automate where it might not necessarily run tests, but maybe it builds it and then deploys it to something, deploys it to a cloud platform or Heroku. A lot of people will go down that route where it deploys. Well, you're kind of touching on CI/CD there. If a lot of
yeah.
engineers have that automation bug, don't we? Where we're like, look, if I'm manually deploying something, I can look at say GitHub Actions or something similar or Circle CI, write a little bit of code, and it will deploy it up to Heroku or whatever it might be as our hosting platform. Where you're actually touching into CI/CD there. That's some of the things. And like you said, it is generally just YAML configuration files that do that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And GitHub has got, I think it is GitHub Actions. Yeah, they've got some really good examples and tutorials. Like if you're just opening up a standard repo and you just look at the Actions tab, definitely like have a look through. Like you're not going to 100% get everything in the first try. Like it's still technical stuff. So there's a bit of trial and error involved, and I think it's one of those things that's definitely a differentiator for juniors if they can understand a bit about CI/CD and they're trying to get their first job. Like I think even if you can't really 100% demonstrate it, but if you've been able to show that you've been able to at least mess around with it on some kind of personal project, I mean, for me, if I was recruiting a junior, I think that would look awesome, particularly if they were self-taught.
Yeah, if they've got that background, and that's what we see with our returners. So they'll have, especially on a version control access, they might have past experience of say SVN before
Mm,
Git, and they're used to having something integrate their code into a main pipeline. So yeah, absolutely, seeing that kind of experience and knowing that you're in this wider ecosystem, isn't it? I think that's the key understanding there of that comes through. So yeah,
yeah,
so that's the CI phase, and then the C. Some people say this CD, which is
the first
continuous.
CD.
The first CD is continuous delivery, and then continuous deployment is the latter CD. I tend to think of them as three, and they're not necessarily levels of maturity of an
Mm,
organization. It just really depends on where an organization wants to get to. So continuous delivery would be making the code that's been integrated and tested and we think it's good to go, making it ready to be deployed. And we might still automate that deployment, but a human tends to get involved and kick that deployment off. And there's lots of reasons as to why that might be, why a human has to get involved. And then when you go full CD, the final CD, that's where kind of if it's been automated and it's been tested, we've run automated tests against it, just get it out. So as soon as it's done, get it out. And the kind of theory behind it is um, small increments means there's less changing each time and it's easier to reason about what's broken. And the smaller the time between the idea and it being in a customer's hands, the better, because we're
yeah.
more able to reason rather than recall something we did 6 months ago and go, what's wrong with that?
It
That's the working theory behind it.
it's much closer to agile than waterfall on the spectrum, which is where we're trying to go. So, yeah, I mean, it makes a lot of sense, and yeah, like you say, you can get stuff out quickly. And something we were chatting about actually at work on last week was about deploying and having features behind switches and toggles, which I thought was a pretty cool way of doing it. Like just being able to toggle it for X amount of users, or we've all done it, particularly on the front end where we push an absolutely horrific bug. Realized immediately you can just flick the switch off. It's great. It's best of both worlds.
Yeah, no, absolutely. My team, if they do listen to this, will be laughing because I'm a big proponent for this. Is if it's done, get it out and but do it in controlled ways. So yeah, like you said, either blue green deployments or feature toggling. Turn it on for just two customers if you've got 200 kind of thing, and then observe it. Yeah, or even labeling it as beta. We people get bought into that. There's that research around, I think is it a book called A Complaint is a Gift? But that people are happier if they find a bug with your software and you fix it than had they never found the bug at all. That's not to
Mm.
say go and introduce bugs in your software and then fix them really quick. Please don't take that as the advice. But yeah, that getting it out there and getting some feedback early on it, I tend to go towards that. And then, but I guess in the past probably has been called a bit of a testing production cowboy. But yeah, feature
Yeah.
toggling. I absolutely love feature toggling and those kind of routes to getting things out, getting it deployed, but also being able to controlled manner get feedback back from it. Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't actually had the opportunity to try it out yet, but after browsing the landing pages of a few providers that do it, I was like, I am thinking this is awesome, and I've got a couple of ideas that I'm going to like build over Christmas is the plan. So I'm going to try and stick some stuff behind theirs. There won't be any users yet, but just the idea that you can just roll something out and toggle it on and
Mm.
off like that, it's really cool. And we've already talked a bit about tech returners, but what's the story behind the organization? Because obviously you are the co-founder and CTO of it. What made you decide to set it up, and what's a typical day like? What's your mission in terms of day to day?
Yeah. So we decided to set it up. So we wanted we Becky, my co-founder, she experienced. So she was on the senior leadership team with us on the same SaaS-based startup, and had a. I mean, you wouldn't even class it as a career break, but was the only parent on that leadership team,
Hmm.
and then returned to work following maternity break, and found that kind of loss of network, loss of kind of staying up to date with the business, what was going on, and thinking there must be other people that feel like this. So if you imagine that experience in one hand, she then led her to set up Women in Tech North, which is, I think it's like the third or fourth biggest women in tech network in the world now, um, and found that other people had experienced this kind of feeling coming back from a break, not necessarily just related to women, but people that had had a career break. So we then, as we'd set up this new organisation, we were both consulting at the time. Like we'd set up a new business, but we were consulting. Becky from a people standpoint, me from a technical standpoint, doing DevOps consultancy. And we set up a pilot to find out really if we'd got existing engineers that were looking to return. We had no commercial model behind it. We just thought we'd put on a few sessions around engineering practices, coding, getting back to coding kind of thing, and see if people did it. And we had our initial cohort was all women, and we had a really successful cohort. People went into organisations like AO and Think Money and things like that. And then we did another one again that was like 90% women looking to return. And then we had that decision to make: do we go for this, or do we stay with the consultancy bit? And thankfully, we got our first customer that helped make that decision a little bit easier, which was the BBC. And they were looking to run their own program for engineers. And we always centered, in terms of the mission, we always centered on the fact that we didn't want to charge money to the individuals that already had these skills. They just needed refreshing, i.e., the returners. So we always centered on what we would call accessibility. We wanted the program to be free of charge. We didn't want to charge those individuals to access careers that they'd
Hmm.
already, done, and accessible from a time standpoint. Because if you've got somebody that's taken a career break, maybe for caring responsibilities, family or health, if we made it a full-time program, then they'd incur cost in another way. So it might be nursery costs, or it might be having to offload onto family, those kind of cognitive costs as
Yeah,
well.
people don't view time as an economic unit, which I think is a bit unfair. Like when a lot of time people are using their time to do unpaid labor and that kind of situation. So yeah, I think it's awesome that you took that into account, because it is, people really don't think about it with either people that are trying to get back into the workforce.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm so glad you said that. Yeah, it is. That's it. It's a commitment on their behalf. Like they're already giving up a lot of time to the program. So we thought we wanted to keep it free, but then we had that aspect of like, yeah, but we still need to have a job and get paid. So how do we
Yeah.
commercialize it? So our model is that we will get, let's say, a cohort of 12 to 18 individuals that have had past engineer careers, and we'll work with a sponsoring organization. And what they will do is pay for that program. And at the end of the program, they can hire as many of those individuals as they like. And what that does is means in that partnership, we'll share with the returners who the sponsoring organisation is, what the technical stack is. The sponsoring organisation will do talks throughout the 8 weeks of the programme, and then they'll interview them at the end using their usual interview practices. And because they've got the past skills, they tend to join at different, certainly not earlier stage careers, but later levels in terms of progression frameworks and things like that. So generally the businesses that will work with us want to have an impact on diversity. 60% of our cohort generally is women, is one factor. We also have diversity in different forms, especially like international disposition and things like that, of people returning to their careers. And then they want to have a big impact on diversity, but they also want it at a decent level in terms of engineering skills. And that's the kind of niche that we focus in on. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and I think it's such a fantastic combination of addressing a real problem in the tech industry, doing some good, and also as well just providing a useful service for these organizations as well as you're helping out organizations and people by connecting great people with great organizations. So I think that's yeah, that sounds really fantastic. So in terms of that, so you actually have the organization basically get partnered with you for the duration then. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, exactly that. Yeah. So we've had like over this past year, we've had um, kind of The Guardian is an organisation
Hmm.
we've worked with, booking.com on the beach, checkout.com down in London. Yeah, and we'll partner with them. The good thing is it also helps the returners self-select. So because there's a sponsoring organisation, if you want to particularly work at The Guardian, you can see up front, well, at the end of this programme, it's for a job with The Guardian. Um, and yeah, and so it helps them understand, well, was that the type of organisation I want to work for at the end of this? And do I want to, so The Guardian Scala, do I want to be doing Scala at the end of the programme? And it helps them select. Whereas, say, for booking, it's Java.
Hmm.
Engineers might look at, well, I've got X years of Java experience, I'm going to go for that one instead. And yeah, and we'll on average we'll get kind of sometimes above 200 people who apply for our program for 12 to 18 places. So there's definitely returners there.
Yeah, that's really cool. I've heard the Guardian, their tech department, they're really rock stars. Like they've done a lot for open source, from what I understand.
Yeah, they open source their technical interviews as well.
Oh,
So
really? That's really cool.
all their interview process is open source, so you can go and see it on GitHub. It's all there. You can see the katas that you'll work through if you go for a pairing exercise and things like that. So yeah, it is all there.
I'll put a link to that in the description because I think the listeners often get a bit worried about their first technical interviews. So just actually having an organization that's willing to give out examples of that. I mean, that's such good press, but that is such a good way for people to practice those interview skills before they actually get into one. Because one of the most common questions we get on like the Discord, codercareer.com/Discord, if you want to join, you find that people just get scared about the technical interviews because they can't really simulate it. And actually, if it's available for them on somewhere like GitHub, that's fantastic. I'm really glad to hear that they're doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that scaredness that is pervasive, isn't it, in our industry? I mean, we've felt it ourselves, haven't we? I'm sure you've felt the same
Yeah.
thing around that. And a part of it, a lot of our programs. So we do the technical upskilling, but we also 50% of the program is also what we call career and mindset. So we talk about confidence, confidence on camera if you're going to do interviews like this. We give them interview preparation. So we've got our career and mindset coaches that will really drill down into the interviews. Millie, that does our career and mindset coaching, she's like forensic with the sponsoring organisations, like really gets to grips with their values and things like that. But yeah, absolutely. And I quite often, we'll probably have a little chat about that, the tech tasks and things. I quite often think tech tasks, they get a bit of a bad rep, like, the pairing, live coding, under pressure, and those kind of things. But I think it tends not to be the tech task that's the bad reputation, it's the execution.
Mm.
People say, we would like you to do this pairing exercise, and then you sit in an interview with somebody that just doesn't speak or looks at their phone. I've heard stories like that, of people where they're in an interview and the person they're pairing with is just looking at the phone or things like that. And it's not the tech task that's bad, it's the execution of how it's done.
Yeah, my last interview round with last time I switched jobs, one of the reasons why I chose the job I did was how good the pairing interview was. And that morning, I had the flu, but the guy who actually is now the lead engineer on the team I work on, he was so good to pair with and really put me at ease. It makes such a difference. And by comparison, I'd done one that morning with another organization who obviously I'm not going to name, but I looked like absolute death, and then they gave me the most vague instructions to build something that was completely commercially useless. Um, and then the guy sat there silently. No, two of them, which made it even worse. It was two of them sitting there silently. And then the worst one of them kept going, "Oof, if I did something," or he'd be like, "Oh, I'm
Oh
not sure I'd do
no.
that." But then like he wouldn't say kind of what way I should be thinking. And then he was like, "Oh, you have X amount of time." And I'm pretty sure he then didn't start the timer or something. So nothing like looking on phones. That would be even worse. But yeah, I mean, I've also heard my fair share of horror stories from it. I mean, do you think the pairing task is the optimal technical task? Because I think we need some kind of technical task, but I'm not sure what's best.
Yeah, I think on that, what was the, and you said the good experience. What was it that stood out that it made you take the role, because you're not the first to say that?
Yeah, so he basically explained how he thought he was going to do it,
Yeah,
and he said basically I'm going to chat along with you while you do it, and like he said, just explain to me what you're thinking. Don't be afraid to write out pseudocode. Don't be afraid to write something out and then go back and refactor it and do it an ugly way. Sorry, do it the ugly way and then
yeah,
do it the nice way. And then he said as well, basically the API we were using had an error and it could have really put me in a tailspin. And then he tried to look at it from his side. He was like, "Yeah, there's definitely something wrong with this API." And then he just made it really. He really put me at ease by joking about it. And he was like, "We're just gonna." He came up with some kind of alternative. I can't remember what it was, but just doing that just put me at ease. And I thought, I'm going to be working with lead engineers like this. This is probably the kind of organization I want to go ahead and work for. So yeah, that's what helped.
yeah, absolutely. That's it, isn't it? Because if you feel that it's a peerage that you're pairing,
Mm,
even if you don't end up hiring that person, but if they've come away from that interview feeling like you were working together rather than being assessed, then you've created the right environment to see the best of someone. At the end of that interview, they could have still seen 5 or 6 engineers that were all similar levels to yourself. Amazingly, you've got that opportunity, but there might have been other people that they gave that same experience to, and they've enabled those people to see the best of them, whatever level they're at, early stage, returners, or whatever it might be. You've gave that person the best chance to see. Anything other than that, you're just assessing their performance under pressure.
mm,
And we never code under pressure like that. Like
yeah.
we just don't. There's times when, don't get me wrong, when the system is down or whatever it might be, and we're trying to work out what it is. But in that case, it tends to be a huddle. There's 6 of us looking at it, trying to work. So we never think, yeah. But I think, yeah, coming back to the tech task aspect, I think we'll always face in our industry some form of live validation. Like, even if it's a take home tech task that you work on and then you bring it back in, there'll be something that team wants to do to check that it was you that did it. Um, Whether that's pairing on a tech task, or you bringing in the code that you've done and then saying, what would you do if we changed it to this? Or talk to us about how you've set it up. I've done those kind of ones. But irrespective, either way, we've got to be in a place where we're comfortable to reason about our code, to explain back our decisions. And when an organisation does that, what they're looking to understand from you is are you able to reason about it? How do you take feedback? There'll be bits where like that person, what they done really well was set boundaries for you. They were like, yeah, do it the imperative, the 10-line version before we start to do a bit of chaining or things like that. And so you then knew, okay, well, I can work through this that way, and then let's refactor. But either way, they'd set those boundaries for you so that you could
Yeah.
then reason about it. It allowed you to then go, look, I know I'm doing this with a for loop, the old style way, but maybe I'll do it with a map next, or a for each or whatever. It allowed you to say that, and then they get an insight into your thinking.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's very powerful for that reason. And then there's obviously the basic side of things where you just need to make sure the person can code. Like I've always had this argue. Well, I got a huge bust up with someone on LinkedIn actually, because he basically called me an idiot because I said that he said, "Why should I have to prove that I'm a software engineer? You don't ask the plumber to do some plumbing for you first." And I said, yes, but city and guilds accreditation. So people outside the UK, that's basically a centralized accreditation to say that someone can be a plumber and will not, forgive me, but flood raw sewage all over your bathroom. Like it's like it's one of those things where we don't have any central accreditation in software engineering. I think that's a good thing. However, the consequence of that means that we are going to have to put up with doing a technical interview. So that's why I feel they're necessary.
Yeah, no, that's it's because we're the Wild West, isn't it? We're not. There's nobody checks our work and signs us off, kind of thing. Like same with. I always use the same analogy where, because if there was some kind of formal levels that we get to, and this is what level we have formally signed them off, then you probably might see that. But I think because it's a creative pursuit, it's quite hard to put something like that in place for
Yeah.
what we do. So you have to have something exactly this. I'm totally with
And
you on that.
it would be harmful for diversity and inclusion if we did put in these accreditations, because it would stop people that are self-taught, or
Yeah,
or maybe couldn't, if it was university based, maybe couldn't afford to go to university or something like that. It would be, so I think it's great for our industry that we don't have it.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah, totally agree. Yeah, I wish I'd have seen that debate happen on LinkedIn. Would have been-
I think it may have ended me being blocked. I think it was a very angry senior developer that obviously just failed an interview. Uh, so on a related note to how we can shape the industry in the future, and meet the tech skills gap that's often talked about. I think the government's been trying. How effective it is, I think it's a bit too early to tell at the moment. What do you think kind of public policy decisions can governments make either in the UK or elsewhere, particularly among like tech returners, to close that skills gap? What kind of schemes can be supported? Where should funding be diverted to?
Yeah, so we've done quite a bit of work with Greater Manchester Combined Authority. They funded programs that we've done. We've got a program that's on at the minute for anybody based in the Liverpool City region for people to do DevOps upskill. So have a look at that if people are listening.
Link in the
And that's
description.
funded by Liverpool Combined Authority, which is great. Um, in terms of some of the things, if I flip it a different way, some of the experiences we've had, we get quite often, we'll get engineers looking to return that are on, say, universal credit.
Hmm.
And of course, a part of that, as I understand it, is they'll have to apply for roles or be seen to be applying for roles. And of course, at the end of our program, all things being well, they're going to have a role that is a high paying salary. Our average salary is 48 coming out of the back of the program across all the
That's a
programs.
great starting average salary.
Yeah, yeah, because people are seeing that they're an engineer with X number of years experience. We've had people that, I mean, bit of a side story. Um, I always go back to a story where I met an engineer who um, was not forthcoming with his past experience. His confidence was super low. In fact, got really upset in the interview. So built him back up, carried on exploring his past career. And he's like, yeah, I was a lead tester at a games firm in Derbyshire. And I was like, well, back then there was probably only a couple of games firms in Derbyshire. I was like, you didn't work at like Core or IDOS, did you? He was like, yeah, I was the lead tester. I was like, did you test Grand Theft Auto? And Tomb Raider, he was like, yeah, that's what I used to do. And he thought that wasn't relevant to share. Um,
Yeah.
so anyway, yeah, we have those kind of stories of the skills that are there. Or, but we do also sometimes clash heads a little bit with Universal Credit, because they'll be saying to our returners, you need to go and apply for this job. And it might be
Mm.
a different type of job, let's say delivery driver or whatever it might be. And they're like, but I'm doing this program, and at the end of it, I'm going to get, hopefully a salary, touching 50. We've certainly definitely had more. And that's one of the things where if we can get a closer relationship with them to say, no, they are on the program, can you make sure that for this period of time they don't need to apply for roles? It actually eases a lot of people into doing our program. A lot of returners might be put off doing our program because they know that to maintain their universal credit and to keep those payments up, they need to be going for interviews or attending their UC meetings and things like that. That's one thing where it shifts a little bit. Having said that, so that's one thing. If anybody's listening in government, maybe get in touch with us and see if there's anything we can do, or we can be trained on how to put those arguments better a bit forward. Having said that, there are lots of funding organisations now. So we've got a programme that's just started focusing on returners. We've got 27 people on that programme. That's funded by the Department for Education for focusing on returners, with partnership with North Coders, which is a coding boot camp well, in the UK now, but originally
Yeah, they've
started in
expanded a lot,
Manchester.
haven't they? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's a great, for early stage careers. But we've partnered with them to be able to offer returners as well, and that's funded by the Department for Education. So there's definitely aspects there for people being able to do it.
Yeah, that sounds really cool. And then in terms of for people that do you think it kind of similar approach required basically for people that are trying to break in with no prior experience? Because I guess it kind of fits the same mold, right? Not trying to stop people from attending so they can meet their UC requirements and that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. That's it. And I think for people breaking in, I've had a couple of questions. A couple of people will always contact me and say I'm thinking of breaking in, and I always think, and I bet you've said the same to people, is first of all, find out if it's fun. Do as much as you
Mm.
can for free. The free code camps, going to meetups, just brilliant to immerse yourself in the community. Find out if even being in the community is fun. Doesn't matter if you've got no experience. Go along to a meetup about React or Python or whatever it might be.
Yeah, people love to help.
And people
It's a
love to
really
help,
friendly
don't they? Yeah,
community. Yeah.
exactly. And if it feels fun, if you have that moment where you've written a little bit of code and you look at it and it prints hello, right? But you get that kick, and you've got that moment where you turn to a friend or a family member or a partner or whatever it might be, and you go, look, and they go, is that all it does? But to you, that's amazing. Pursue that, because that will stick with you, because then it's hobbyist, then it's vocational. So do as much as you can for free, and then explore the free programs. There's lots of free programs out there, because it can be done without paying extortionate figures in boot camps. Having said that, the boot camps are still, they are very good. Like my main connection is with the North Coders one. That's a brilliant boot camp. A lot of their programs are now funded, so they're free for people to work through. But yeah, I always say to people, find out if it's fun, because when the going gets tough and you're trying, like we were talking about React hooks, weren't we? You're trying to work out how to do global state management with the context API or something like that. It's the passion and the fun that will get you through that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what's the phrase for it? It's definitely not the canyon of despair, but it's like your like basically mental health and you're learning to code. It peaks at really high at the start, and you're like, "This is amazing! I'm printing out hello world. Like I'm gonna shout. I want to shout this to the world. This is so great." And then it crashes because you're learning the kind of medium level skills, and it's a real slog. I remember being so frustrated, plugging away at Free Code Camp, trying to figure out how to strip vowels out of an array of strings. And I remember I literally on basically on the verge of tears, which is really unlike me, just so frustrated. Um, and I just couldn't figure out how to do it. And it's like, I still remember that. And I was like 4 years ago. And you hit these really low points. Then eventually you come out the other side when you're able to make a full stack project by yourself. Like, not like, there is no better feeling in the whole world. It's awesome. But yeah, getting through that canyon of despair. I'm gonna find out what it's actually called and put it in the description because
Put it, yeah,
it
we'll put it
cannot be.
in. That, you know, that I often, that totally, that I remember so I finished in, say, 2007, and at that point my first Java job was, I was paid 16,500 per year, which was my first Java job. I remember it now. I think it started at 16 and then it went to 16,500. And it was for the first 2 years. I had that bit, you know, where you'd face a problem in the day and you'd go home that night, and you'd be like, "Yeah, there's only one thing for it. I'm going to have to quit in the morning. I cannot solve this. I must be in the wrong job." Have those moments of, "Yeah, I've got no idea how to solve this. I'm definitely in the wrong job. I'm going to have to quit." And those moments of second guessing yourself, and then you come back the next day, like you mentioned before, a good mentor helps. I had a great mentor when I
Mm.
first started, would kind of steer me in the right direction, and then bit by bit, it wasn't until probably 18 months to 2 years that I didn't those feelings started to subside, and think you'd see a problem and go, okay, yeah, I think I've seen something like this before. I can work through it. But yeah, certainly, I remember have those moments going, I'm going to get found out here. Yeah,
Yeah, if that doesn't sum up imposter syndrome, like, yeah, just feeling, oh, how have I always figured, oh no, I've managed to basically blag my way into this job. How I'm gonna get found out. Like, I'm not really a software engineer, And then there is it's interesting. I think you said 2 years, right? Because I reckon that was a point for me as well. So actually, relatively recently for me, I suddenly felt a lot more confident in my
mm,
abilities, and it felt so much better. But it does get there, and then so the best thing you can do if anyone's listening who's already hit that point, is try and start helping and mentoring other people. Because if you can make the difference that hopefully someone made for you, it's a circle of life. And like we were saying earlier, mentoring is a two-way street.
yeah, absolutely. It embeds your own knowledge, doesn't it, as well? Because you have to try and explain it back, and people asking, why is it like that? I found that really, when we first set up Tech Returners, I found that really hard, that transition, and somebody said, why did you do it like that? You know,
Mm.
not, you can't go to, because you do. Like, you can't, that's not a valid reason for somebody that's learning. And it wasn't a valid reason for me to use either. So that kind of, yeah, being able to reason about code and explain it back and why it's done that way, and was really powerful for me to try and understand as well.
Yeah, it's such an underrated skill, being able to explain technical concepts to people, either who are more junior than you, and are technical, or especially to non-technical people. So particularly for maybe not even necessarily tech returners here, like someone who's getting into tech for the first time, who maybe comes from a customer-oriented background, that can
Yeah,
be a really useful skill to transfer over. And yeah, if you can explain technical concepts to people either who are less experienced or straight up not in that area, that's such a powerful skill.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. So I think that's more or less sort of covered off all the main topics I had on the show notes. So just a massive thanks, James, for coming on the show. Was there anything in particular you wanted to shout out? How can people find out more about tech returners and if they're interested?
Yeah, so I think you can pop my LinkedIn. Um, please, if people are interested, please by all means do message me on LinkedIn. That's probably the best one. Um, we run programs throughout the year. We're just about to start hiring for our next couple of programs, starting in January 2023. So they'll be out soon for the Returner program. And then also, if you have a look on techreturners.com, there's the DevOps Upskill program. If you are based in Liverpool, that's an upskill program that we're looking at. Later on in the year, we do also run a conference called Reframe, Reframe Women in Tech Conference, based in Manchester. And that's a 2-day conference that takes place in March, on reframe-wit.com. But again, I'm sure you'll pop the links in there for us. But yeah,
Yeah. All
by all
that'll be
means,
down in
sounds
the
good.
description. And yeah, thank you so much for coming on. It's been a really interesting chat, and yeah, it's been really great. We should do it again sometime.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, lovely to meet you.
Cool. And thanks as well to the listeners for checking out another episode of Dakota Career. We got some awesome results from the Spotify Wrapped for podcasters this year. So thanks so much for all your support. Here's to a great 2023. Have a great Christmas, depending on if this is released or not, pre or post Christmas. Either I hope you had a great one and Happy New Year. Thanks, everyone.